2, 1, 0. All engine running.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucer. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat.
Just before 9 o'clock this morning in New York, the passenger jet, which had taken off from Boston, slammed into the World Trade Center. Thick black smoke blotted out the Manhattan skyline.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I think we can go ahead and get started. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the Esoteric Roundtable Podcast, and we are your hosts. I am Justin. I'm joined here with my good friend Ben, and as we said last week, my good brother Jim. I watched it over, and I think I'm going to keep that. I like good brother, you know, because I got a bad brother running around here somewhere. He's a good guy. He's not a bad guy, but in terms of lore for the show, he's going to be a bad guy now. But anyways, so today we have a topic from our good brother Ben, who is now our brother. I'm fucking this whole thing up. I'm fucking the whole intro up, aren't I? Ben, you are now my brother, and you are giving us a presentation, and I would like you to start
good,
it
man.
now.
All right, man. So today I'm going to cover something that we're all probably pretty familiar with: the assassination of President Lincoln and a potential secret society that's linked to his assassination.
Damn.
You know, it's pretty well documented throughout history, his assassination, and we're all taught in school that John Wilkes Booth was the person who assassinated President Lincoln at the Ford's Theater on April 14th of 1865 while watching a play. But what if I told you that there's a deeper story and that the history books simply do not tell it?
Absolutely. I would 100% believe that, because I have heard a lot of things about Abraham Lincoln that make you realize that he was really propped up to be a greater person than he really was, you know?
In a lot of ways.
I'm not going to get into them right now just because I don't have the notes, and so I'd probably just be making half of it up, honestly. So maybe that's an episode for later. But yeah, no, I definitely believe that there's some weird stuff connected to Lincoln and his death. Yeah. What do you think, Jim?
I always thought if it was in the history book, it had to be 100% true. So my mind's blown right now.
Yeah.
I'm being sarcastic, of course. I'm sure there's something there, and I can't wait to hear what theories you have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there is a man by the name of John DeSalvo. He is a collector of different historical artifacts, and he had a few items that stood out to me personally when I was researching this. One of which was pretty cool. He had a cutout of the curtain that was hanging next to President Lincoln that had his blood stain on it after he was assassinated in Ford's Theater. It's the only known piece of the curtain to exist. That was pretty neat. And then one other thing that he also has that stood out to me is a diary and a Civil War journal of an officer that was present the night that President Lincoln was assassinated. And pretty much hour by hour, this journal documents what's happened. Like, it starts off like, I'm hearing word April 14th, 1865, near midnight, that President Lincoln's been shot, mortally wounded. The streets are panicking, things of that nature. And then he goes into like the morning hours to when it was officially announced. However, one other thing that was important to note here is that, we all have heard that John Wilkes Booth was the one who assassinated President Lincoln, but it's always been kind of perplexing to me because he was a stage actor. What motive would a stage actor have to assassinate a president?
Right.
Another thing that stands out to me is that Booth assassinated President Lincoln less than 3 months after he abolished slavery or, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Booth was caught and killed by Union troops a little while after that, is what we're told, at least.
Yeah, like in a
However,
barn or something, right? Or in
yeah,
a
a
farm,
barn,
maybe a barn.
a barn. But there's reason to believe that Booth did not act alone in his journey to assassinate President Lincoln. A few things were kind of weird to me when researching this. Like, Ulysses S. Grant was invited to Ford's Theater the night that President Lincoln was assassinated. He declined the invitation, was not there. Some people, through sources that I found, have said that he was warned not to go. And President Lincoln's personal bodyguard that normally accompanied him was also not there. He did not show up. A lot of things really had to fall in place for this plot to work correctly to begin with. First off, a major general of the Union was not there. That would have garnered a lot of security, a lot of attention around him. Likely
So
would have.
it's one of those situations where it's like maybe one or two of these things alone, not that big of a deal, but when there's so many things stacked up that just work so perfectly to make sure the president gets killed,
So there's actually a lot of evidence that supports that John Wilkes Booth was a Confederate sympathizer and is believed to have been a Confederate spy during this time period. Booth had at least one documented trip to Canada, and at the time, Canada was still a British colony. So they really they really depended on Confederate cotton at the time. That was one big economic thing for them, was they needed cotton as a British colony. They really didn't sit very well with the Union because they were trying to take that away, that free labor. At the time, though, the Confederates had a headquarters within Canada in Montreal. Let me see where I'm at here. I'm sorry, y'all.
You're good, brother. Take your time.
But yeah, they depended heavily on cotton at this time that came from Confederate states. So this meant that Canada had great benefit in siding with the Confederacy at this particular point in time. There was also a prominent secret society that was headquartered through the Confederacy in Canada called the Knights of the Golden Circle. Many people believed
I think I've
that.
heard that before. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's thinking out loud. I don't know why I said that.
It gets pretty neat here. So the Knights of the Golden Circle, headquartered in Canada, really heavy ties with the Confederacy. And many people believe that Booth was heavily affiliated with this society and even very likely a member. The goals of this secret society was to ensure that the South remained an economic powerhouse, even after the abolition of slavery. And one particular reason why people link Booth to the Knights of the Golden Circle to begin with is he had a friendship with a man by the name of John Surratt. And Surratt was a very well-known, prominent member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, was pretty open about it, talked about it. So to dive further in this, John Surratt is really nobody I'd ever heard of before, but there were some people that were linked to the Knights of the Golden Circle that really kind of blew my mind. In 1864, the Confederate Congress appropriated $5 million. In 1864, that's a lot of money, for a sabotage campaign against the Union. $1 million of that money went toward a project known as the Northwest Conspiracy. So this conspiracy was operated by Confederate saboteurs based out of Canada. Their really main focus of this was to attack Union strongholds in the Midwest, like Missouri, Illinois, areas of that nature. So near where you guys are.
Right.
A big group that came out of this Northwest Conspiracy was a group known as Quantrill's Raiders. And there was one very well-known member of the Quantrill's Raiders that stood out to me a lot. The outlaw Jesse James.
Ooh.
So Jesse James was very heavily affiliated with the Quantrill's Raiders, the Northwest Conspiracy, and is very likely tied to Booth at this time.
Yeah.
So being that you guys, live in Missouri, I used to live in St. Louis. I visited the Merrimack Caverns in Sullivan, Missouri. I know that Jesse James had a hideout there. And so this was pretty neat. I was like, I do know that if they had a Northwest Conspiracy, they were focused in this area, that would have been accurate based on, where Jesse James used to hang out.
Right.
So John Wilkes Booth, John Surratt, and Jesse James all have connections to this secret society, at least loosely. all of which are linked to the Northwest Conspiracy, which may have included a plan to assassinate President Lincoln. There was also an author who wrote a book. This was relatively recently. His name is Warren Gettler, and he wrote a book called He wrote a book called Rebel Gold, and it talks about the motives, the rituals, and goals of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and their direct links to prominent historical figures, such as John Wilkes Booth. Warren directly links John Wilkes Booth, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who later became the head of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, so
Yeah.
pretty prominent person, John Calhoun, who was a former U.S. vice president to the Knights of the Golden Circle, and Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War at the time. Gettler
these
also
are
claims
definitely some people with a little bit of pull around things.
it gets even wilder, man. So Gettler, the guy who wrote Rebel Gold, also has a claim that at the time, the Knights of the Golden Circle would have been more powerful than both the FBI and the CIA combined are today.
Yeah, I mean,
He said,
especially with the. I'm sorry, did you say it was not the Commissioner of War? Who was
the Secretary of
the
War
Secretary of War? I mean, that's
and a former vice
hefty,
president.
man. That isn't that
Yeah.
what Kissinger was for
Yeah,
the
I think so.
Vietnam stuff? And I mean, we know what he did. He was
Yeah.
up there with like Mao and Hitler and shit, and the people he killed over there. So you can have a lot of pull in a place like that. So.
Yeah. So Gettler even has a claim that there were over 500,000 members to this secret society, Knights of the Golden Circle. So they had numbers. They would have been very powerful, had some very strong political figures. He also claims that Jesse James himself was the field commander of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Gettler, the more I researched him, he talks about a document he found in the Library of Congress called The Great Conspiracy. I looked for this document, and I did a search for The Great Conspiracy on the Library of Congress website, the .org or .gov.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever website it is. I looked up The Great Conspiracy, and about 299,000 documents popped up. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, which is probably done intentionally, but
But there is a passage in this Great Conspiracy book that Gettler found that reads, "Before they enter, Booth was blindfolded and his arms bound. The word Rome was pronounced and the door thrown open. Two men entered the assembly and stood in front of the candidate with naked swords planted at his heart, to risk all to help Southern independence shake off a hated Yankee domination." To me, this sounds very similar to a Freemason's initiation ritual. It also states
Mm,
Booth's name very clearly. It calls
right.
John Wilkes Booth out by name. So
Damn,
this particular thing,
that's
to-
crazy, dude.
it is pretty wild, man. And this is in the Library of Congress.
That's insane.
The Knights of the Golden Circle were a Masonic Confederate secret society, so that a lot of them had heavy ties to the Freemasons, based on Gettler's personal statements. So you got to take his word, but I mean, I want to read his book to find out more for sure. He seems to have some evidence that backs it up, but that document in the Library of Congress, like that's fact, that's there. I need to find it myself just to clarify, like, hey, this is true.
Right.
But it definitely seems like an initiation ritual, specifically similar to the Freemasons.
Yeah.
Gettler then further explains how they have the Confederate Masonic ties. It would lead me, after reading this document, to believe that Booth did have an initiation into what is likely the Knights of the Golden Circle.
How did we lose Jim? But yeah,
I
you
can
can
start
keep
back.
going. It's
Yeah.
all good.
Okay, I can start back when he comes back. That's no big deal.
There we go.
All right, I'll give it 3 seconds so you can have some time to cut off of this. So
we could have just kept going. It's all good.
Gettler further explains that, they had some Masonic ties, the Knights of the Golden Circle did. I personally believe that Booth was initiated into this organization. Circling back to Jesse James, There's another account that a man by the name of Henry Ford, not the Henry Ford that we think of, the one
Right.
from Detroit, Michigan, who created the powerhouse motor vehicle thing, in a town called Brownwood, Texas, in the late 1800s, a man showed up by the name of Henry Ford. And Justin, you can pull up a picture. Just look up Henry Ford, Brownwood, Texas. And the
Sure.
first image that should come up is a man in the 1800s that has a beard. To me, looks a lot like Jesse James. A lot like Jesse James with a beard. Through documents of this town, they claim that he came to the town penniless, was very poor, very quickly rose to prominence, had a lot of money, a lot of influence, started a bank, and he would never talk about his past. A lot of people believe it was Jesse James, though the history books tell us that Jesse James was shot in the head in the 1800s in Missouri and died. This would have been after the time that Jesse James was supposedly dead. But when this Henry Ford man died, it's documented that Jesse James' brother and mother showed up to the funeral of Henry Ford in Brownwood, Texas. So to me, that seems kind of suspicious. Like he looks like Jesse James. You know,
Yeah, and I got a
he
couple
didn't have anything.
pictures pulled up here side by side, and you can definitely see in like the shape of the head and nose shape. I know you guys won't be able to see this. I don't believe.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, but I can, and everyone else can. So haha to you guys, but you can definitely see some resemblance for sure.
So going back to that, with the Knights of the Golden Circle, they had a plot with this Northwest conspiracy that was meant to keep the South prominent after the abolition of slavery. So the Golden Circle, the Knights of the Golden Circle, they had this circle that they called the Golden Circle that would have been along the Gulf of Mexico and Mexico, up in the southern parts of the United States, like near Texas area, Mississippi, Louisiana, and all the way down to Florida. That would circle back around to the tip of Mexico and go back up, where they could establish a new form of cotton slavery in order to keep producing cotton and making money off of it. The theory was that Jesse James was the field operator, the field commander, and his job was to go out and get gold. Because we always hear of Jesse James being an outlaw and stealing gold, but you never hear of him using the gold for anything.
Right.
So
That is a good
the
point.
theory is that the Knights of the Golden Circle were trying to save funds for an expected second civil war that would follow the Civil War that abolished slavery.
Okay,
So
yeah,
that's
that
really
makes
what ties
sense.
that
They were
together.
like, all right, kill the guy that abolished the slavery and let's run that shit back. No, yeah,
So
I mean that's
it
makes sense to me.
in Brownwood, Texas.
Not okay.
They-
Hold on. Let me pause. I don't mean make sense like in a good way. Not that I think
No, I
like that.
understand.
All right? I just mean I get where he's going. All right.
Yeah. So in Brownwood, Texas, there was they did some scans, like sonar scans, because there was rumors that there were tunnels that connected, and they were doing some excavation for different projects in Brownwood, Texas in the 21st century, like recently in the past 100 years, where they dug up portions to start it and found tunnels underground where they found some artifacts that were kind of look like, like gold and things like that, and different symbolisms and things of that nature. And in Missouri, they've also found some sites like that as well. So they have reason to believe that there was something stored in these towns, maybe tunnels. Even though Jesse James was never directly confirmed to have lived in Brownwood, Texas, to me, it seems like it has some merit. It's really weird that Jesse James would have, that Henry Ford would have died and Jesse James' mother and brother would show up to the funeral.
Yeah, definitely.
It would look
And
very
I
similar.
mean, especially like I don't think they were based out of anywhere near that, so it seems like there would have been a hefty travel to do that, and that's not something you just did for a passing friend back in the day,
And not only that, think of where Texas is. How far is Texas from the Gulf of Mexico? Brownwood, Texas, that would be part of where that Golden Circle would likely be.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be right in there.
So what the theory is that John Wilkes Booth did not act alone in this assassination plot, that there's a big theory that there was a meeting in that great conspiracy book that Warren Gettler talks about that he found in the Library of Congress. He states that documents a meeting that took place with Booth and other members plotting to assassinate President Lincoln and saying that they would help him and aid him after the fact. So some people have a theory that Booth was not actually caught and killed by the Union troops, like the history books tell us, that he was aided and helped to escape, and it was a setup or
They
something of that
just
nature.
use
That
some like
seems
random dead person.
to me that seems a little far fetched, but I mean I can see it as being possible. There's a lot that lines up here that I found interesting.
Yeah.
They're the Canadians really helping them. They were based out of there. There was a direct mention of Booth in a secret society initiation ritual.
Yeah, and I mean, we can't underplay the fact that when these societies and things are done with people, they're cool with throwing them away, you know? It's
Yeah,
not like the
exactly.
people are very expendable, so it's not like they're going to be sitting there missing John Wilkes Booth, you know? He was a tool that they
Yeah,
used to get a job done, and now they need to get rid of that tool, so.
exactly. And
Especially back I'm sorry, especially back then, I was gonna say, I think they can get away with things a lot easier than they can nowadays.
Definitely, there's not
It's like,
absolutely.
"Oh,
somebody
yeah,
on
that's him."
TikTok on every corner and live streaming the
Right.
happenings, so.
Yeah. And another thing that I found cool is they also talk about they found a cipher in the trunk of John Wilkes Booth hotel room that he stayed at the night that he assassinated President Lincoln. There was a cipher that they used to use to encrypt messages. And I never could find what that encryption said, but I found it interesting. I'm gonna have to do some more research, but I
Mhm.
wonder if there was something in there that could potentially connect more to the story.
Yeah.
But I found it to me that was enough evidence to at least make it interesting. Do I think this is fact? I really don't know. But
And I mean, excuse me, at this point, it's hard to tell the exact truth. I think we can all agree that just 100% listening to what the history books have told us and things like that, and what we're taught in our public education, is probably not 100% true. But
yeah,
then, maybe this isn't 100% true, but maybe it's somewhere in the middle where the truth really lies. I think one good part about hearing the over rationalized, public opinion, and then sometimes the way over the top conspiracy opinions is that you can take those two and find the median
yeah,
of like what probably really happened. And maybe it's just like, but I don't know, honestly. This really doesn't seem super far-fetched to me. There's no woo-woo.
yeah,
They're not doing it to make the sun rise sooner and melt all the sheep or some crazy shit. They're
yeah.
just like, I
To me,
want
the
this guy
motive is
dead
there.
for money. And I mean, that sounds a lot like what governments do, or just
Yeah,
what humans do.
yeah. And I mean, they were obviously the Confederacy and the Unions were already trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
You know,
So it's
you
like
had
this,
a
the
very
beef
Union
didn't
leading.
end. I'm sure they were
Yeah,
like, all right, he signed the paper, guys. Fuck. All right.
yeah.
Never
We
mind.
quit. Yeah, we quit.
Nah, yeah, no, seriously. So
So
I really think there could be some merit in this one.
the motive is there. The motive is there. And I really thought I had more with this, but it was so interesting. I was like, I got to talk about this at some point because it's just eating me up. Like thinking about, I'm
Oh,
all caught in the
absolutely.
1800s the past week thinking about this. So it was fun to talk about. I hope you guys thought it was interesting.
No, that is super duper interesting, man. I really enjoyed that. And I think we've been putting a lot of pressure on ourselves for it to do longer recordings and stuff like that, but I think that topic right there was probably one of the more interesting conversations we've had, and it may not have been the longest. So I think, quality over quantity for sure. I think that was kick ass, man.
Well, good.
Agree, I loved it, and I think, kind of a caveat to this whole thing, we keep talking about kinda history and what we're taught and everything, and you know what, I understand we have to teach kids at least the generics, but, of it, and I think there's always gonna be more to it, and there's different ways to look at it, but I guess what I'm trying to get, I wish, schools would kinda keep more of an open mind when they teach things like this, that, even though this is the theory at the time that we're rolling with, that they would kinda
Right.
interject with this kind of alternate theories and things like that because we'll
Yeah,
never know
Absolutely.
for sure.
it's
And I think this
so
was
impossible to know for sure. The game of telephone, and even it's like
Yes.
someone gets back to their office back in the 1800s and they're like, tell their secretary, okay, write this down. And they're telling all, talking all fast, and this is what happened, and he said this, and they said this, and the chick's like,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe they missed
Right.
something, you know, it's just human error or anything like that, or just liars, big part of it, you know?
Yeah.
So
I
it's
And
think
also
all,
how and perception as well, how someone sees it may be completely different than another person, and it gets kind of perceived as fact when really it may be fact to one person, but the other person saw it from another way. So I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I loved it. I've never heard this before. So
I hadn't either before, just like a week and a half ago, but I was like, I gotta share it. One
all
other
right,
thing I'll touch on that you guys are talking about, like the alternate theory and what the history books telling us being true or not true. One thing that I've always found mind-boggling is, at least in my experience, from like elementary all the way up through middle school, we were always taught that Christopher Columbus, in particular, was this amazing, stellar guy, that
yeah,
discovered the Bahamas and just waltzed in, and we have America. He discovered it. And
yeah.
then, the later you go, they're like, oh, he was a total piece of garbage.
Yeah,
You know,
they shit on him
they
harder and
shift it.
harder, and as they should. He did some pretty
Yeah.
deplorable things, but I feel like personally I've gotten past the hating so much on him directly, and just
Mhm.
hating and seeing the environment that he came from, and like the culture that they created, and they turned these conquistadors into monsters, man. And like,
Yeah.
well, he wasn't necessarily a conquistador. That was
He wasn't
incorrect in
Spanish.
saying that, but yeah, he was French. They say he was English. He was French. His name was like Cristo Colombo or some shit like that. It sounds like a bowl of gumbo. He was French. France was doing the same thing as the Spanish, going around and
Yeah.
taking shit over in some pretty vile ways, as was pretty much everyone, except, the good, spiritual, peaceful, normal human beings. But
There was at
yeah.
least a good portion of time in my life where, like, I thought Christopher Columbus was just a good guy, like
Oh,
from a kid.
absolutely. I
That's
mean,
how I
I
was
was
taught.
telling
We still
people
have
at
Columbus
work.
Day.
I remember in high school when they were talking about Henry Ford, I'm like, oh my God, this guy's a saint. This guy saved us from a 12-hour workday. I would love to give this man a hug. Like, that guy fucked us. Like, we are fucked.
40-hour
Our
work
whole
week.
country is based off of roads. We will never be able to walk down the fucking street normally again, and the only way they're going to give that back to us is in a 15-minute city, and we'll be trapped in
Yeah.
forever. So paired with the petroleum fellas and all of that, we are screwed. Anyways, before I get too off topic, actually, I wanted to bring this back to John Wilkes Booth. And have you guys heard of the similarities between Lincoln's assassination with Booth and Kennedy's assassination? Am I getting that
With
correct?
Oswald.
Are those the two that are similar? Yeah, right.
I'm not sure. I've never
Oh
heard
goodness,
anything
yeah.
about this.
See, I guess I'm gonna have to nip that in the bud. Maybe when we bring this up next time, Ben, because you're gonna be bringing it up again, right? Like you have more that you'd
Yeah.
like to research
Well,
on this.
I wanna read Rebel Gold because it seems like that book has like pictures and evidence of things that Warren Gettler's discovered. I found him to be fast. I even personally emailed him last night to see if he can send me the copy of the document he found in Library of Congress, because I would like to see that, because I was just looking and it's very hard to find. So I emailed him, and I'm gonna get a copy of his book and read it because it seems interesting. He had a lot of factual evidence. He had actual evidence, and I want to see more of it because I was watching a clip of him, and so yeah.
Right.
But I'm gonna read Rebel
Absolutely.
Gold, and I'm gonna see if I can find out some more
All
interesting
right,
things to
man.
bring
When
out
you
on
bring
this
that
topic.
up, maybe I can have a little bit more on this. And I know there's two assassinations that were similar in some weird coincidental ways, like the names were similar of the people, and I don't know. But yeah, anyways, Jim, do you have anything
No?
else to add before we nip this one in the bud?
no, nothing else to add to this.
All right. Well, I think this was a super stellar episode, guys. Excuse me. Of course, I'm gonna start horsing up now, but I think we're gonna go ahead and kick it off for the day. We're gonna have more uploads this week than we have prior, starting this week and this year, I should say. We're gonna be trying to stick to a 3-ish uploads a week on at least the YouTube and things like that, and be looking out for some things like Patreon and hopefully things like maybe Rockfin and other paid apps, so you don't have to stick to one. If you don't like one, you know, you can try out some other paid apps, whichever one you prefer. Maybe the YouTube subscription thing, you know, the membership thing. But that's some things we'll be figuring out. But for right now, I think we can go ahead and say peace out. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I forgot the keep an open mind. Remember to keep an open mind. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.